Studios of KPFK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles, this is Uprising.
Uh-oh, what happened?
It's Thursday, March 19th, 2015. What's behind the armed shootings, hostage-taking and killings in Tunisia? Bechir Blagui, the founder of freetunisia.org, will join us in studio. And a major battery recycling plant in Southern California closed down after spewing toxic pollutants for 2 decades. We'll speak with attorney Gladys Limon about why it took so long and whether justice has been done. Plus, author and thinker Charles Eisenstein joins us to discuss his book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. That's coming up after the news. Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Chenjerai Kumanyika, Assistant Professor of Communication Studies at Clemson University. Hi, Chenjerai. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration released data today that confirmed global temperatures between December 2014 to February 2015 were the highest on record. Despite record cold weather on the U.S. East Coast, which Republicans like Senator Jim Inhofe have used to deny climate change, the data are an indication that global warming is underway. President Obama is set to sign an executive order this morning to cut the federal government's greenhouse gas emissions. There are hundreds of millions of acres of public land owned by the government on which there are coal, oil, and gas operations. And just 2 days ago, Interior Secretary Sally Jewell pledged to strongly address these operations. President Obama has said he wants the last 2 years of his tenure to be marked by bold action on climate change. Chenjerai, do you think he's committed enough to drastically cut emissions?
Well, I think the Obama administration is moving in the right direction on this, but not nearly fast enough. The NOAA report on this year's record temperatures make that crystal clear. First, Obama's only moving forward as a result of ongoing climate change efforts by grassroots organizations. And, Earth Justice, for example, sued the administration in an effort to force them to regulate gas and oil companies. And it's important to listen to organizations like this because there's a strong consensus that it's time to move past fossil fuels altogether. The other thing is that many of the other administration's other programs have tended to rely on giving companies incentives to regulate themselves, and that's proven not to work. So, we have to support organizations like the Sierra Club, 350.org, Idle No More, who really have brought us to this point.
Students at the University of Virginia are up in arms. More than 1,000 of them marched last night to protest the treatment of fellow student Martise Johnson by an agent of the Alcoholic Beverage Control Department. Johnson was arrested by 2 officers so violently that he required 10 stitches to his head. The 20-year-old black student is an Italian and media studies major and was arrested unexpectedly while outside a club. Photos of his bleeding face and head have been widely shared online. Meanwhile, the National Urban League released its 2015 State of Black America report this morning. Mark Morial, the group's president and CEO, told press, quote, "Black America is in crisis, a jobs crisis, an education crisis, and a justice crisis." Chenjerai, are we making slow progress on police brutality against African Americans? It seems as though more people are protesting, and now it's making the news more often than it used to.
I think we are making progress, but it also shows how persistent these problems are. I mean, police brutality has been a nationally recognized problem for a while, dominating news headlines since at least August of 2014. And you still have these types of incidents occurring on a daily basis. There's no real crime here, and yet another unarmed young black citizen is treated with violence. So these problems are also widespread. This was an alcohol beverage agent, and so we can see that the violent logic of law enforcement is also present here. And of course, it's racialized. Sonali, I can't help but notice this incident happened only days after St. Patrick's Day, a day when white students on campuses throughout the country display all kinds of public drunkenness. So at least there's an infrastructure that can amplify the issue, and Martise Johnson's name will be part of this movement.
And finally, the American Civil Liberties Union has filed another lawsuit against government secrecy, this time over the policies of the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, at airports. The TSA has a program to detect unusual behavior called Screening Passengers by Observation Techniques, or SPOT, which it says has scientific justification. When the ACLU filed a Freedom of Information Act request for supporting documents last year, year, there was no response. The newly launched lawsuit claims, quote, there is no known instance in which these techniques were responsible for apprehending someone who posed a security threat. Instead, the ACLU worries that the TSA program is based on pseudoscience and results in racial profiling. A former TSA head told Congress during 2012, behavior detection officers referred 2,116 travelers to law enforcement officers, which led to 183 arrests and 30 travelers denied boarding. However, not a single would-be terrorist has been spotted over 12 years. Chenjerai, what do you make of the SPOT program? Can you hear me, Chenjerai?
Well, in September of 2014, yes, I can. Okay. In September of 2014, the ACLU released a report of TSA screening from May 2012 to February. And what they found was an airline security caste system where government employees and politicians enjoyed expedited screening at airports while the general public is subject to scrutiny even when passengers are not on the so-called no-fly list. So the overreach of this kind of surveillance affects groups differently. Some people are subjected to a particular kind of treatment. And then on the other side, there's no data suggesting that these practices are effective in reducing terrorist acts. And the TSA also lacks a system to evaluate its own mistakes. So I see the ACLU's strategy as one effort to push back against this egregious type of surveillance and really non-security measures.
And we'll see what comes of this lawsuit. I certainly would like to see the so-called scientific justification for this program. Chenjerai, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Chenjerai Kumanyika is an assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University, and he's our daily newsflash guest expert on Thursdays. This is Uprising. We'll be right back. This is Uprising. I'm Sonali. The site of the first Arab Spring Revolution, Tunisia, burst into the news yesterday when armed gunmen stormed the National Bardo Museum in the capital and took hostages. The attack left 23 people dead, 18 of whom were foreign tourists. Two of the attackers, Yassine Labidi and Hatem Kachnui, were fatally shot by law enforcement. At least 50 people were injured. As of this morning, 9 suspects have been arrested in connection with the incident. While details of the attack are still emerging, the backdrop of this brazen incident is a country that is grappling with a post-revolution government. The nascent Tunisian government has been fighting a low-level conflict against Islamic militants, particularly near the border with Algeria. In fact, several rebel groups, such as Ansar al-Sharia, which the U.S. and Europe classified as terrorist groups, have emerged since the 2011 revolution. Earlier in the month, Tunisian authorities discovered a large arms cache, including Kalashnikov rifles, rockets, and landmines near the border with Libya. And just a day before yesterday's attack, the government had dismantled a group that was apparently recruiting Tunisian fighters for the conflict in Libya. Some are speculating that yesterday's attack may have been in retaliation to such crackdowns. My guest is Bechir Blagui. He is the founder of freetunisia.org. Welcome to Uprising, Bechir.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for joining us. What do you think that the attack yesterday was in response to the cracking down of these groups that are recruiting fighters to Libya? Or is it too early to tell?
Well, Sonali, one major development happened last week, which is the confirmed killing of Ahmed Darwisi, who in Libya, who is, you mentioned Ansar Sharia, who is one of the leaders of Ansar Sharia in Tunisia. And he is the number one suspect in the killing of the 2 prominent politicians that we talked about last time.
Right, when we had you on last year.
Shukri Lamini. So the it seems, if one puts that event in perspective, it seems that could be in retaliation because Ahmed Rouisi, by all standards, is a key person in Ansar Sharia in Libya, and his elimination could signal a turnaround when it comes to confronting these terrorist groups.
Now, Tunisia has also been grappling with thousands of people leaving the country to join the Islamic State's fight against the U.S. in Iraq and Syria. This is also something we have been talking about, and we talked about with you last time. Is that related to what's happening to the incident yesterday?
Reports have confirmed anywhere between 3,000 to 4,000 Tunisians, the largest contingent of the Islamic State.
From any one country?
Yeah, from any one country.
Even Syria and Iraq? Even
Syria and Iraq, and this is not something that obviously Tunisians are proud of, but this comes on the heels of the Tunisian revolution where the release of a number of suspects from previous terrorist attacks in Tunisia because of potentially illegal practices in their arrests and in their court cases. Their release was, by all standards, was a reason for them to recruit in that year, 2011, 2012. And the Syrian revolution started, and there was a wave of Tunisians leaving through Turkey, through Libya, through a number of ways.
How many people were released? This must have been a massive release.
We had thousands released. Well, there was a security breach on some of these prisons during the revolution, but even after that, there was a decree to release a number of them. Some of them were probably innocent, but got hardened inside. But most of them were, if not part of some Islamic movement, and that is what, when they were released, they became recruiters.
So would you say that there is a sector of Tunisian society, perhaps marginal, but when compared to the whole population, but still significant in that they feel that they didn't get what they wanted in the revolution? That one would sort of imagine that the story of the Tunisian revolution is one with a happy ending, one of the only ones of the Arab Spring movements with a relatively happy ending.
But not with least of its challenges. Tunisia still grapples with an economic challenge that has become clearly the #1 challenge right now. And then the sector of society that you're trying to talk about is shouldn't have that. In theory, shouldn't have, because the constitution that we have on the books right now protects their rights. So whether you're religious or not, no longer is a defining character of what you are to be in Tunisia. So you're free to practice religion.
So what motivates them? What motivates the thousands of people that are leaving to fight for ISIS? What might be motivating, as far as you can tell, the men who went to the museum and shot many tourists?
It is not one reason. It is a number of reasons that has to be put in perspective. Again, you have still 25% of society is in dire poverty. You still have an average unemployment on the upper 18%, while if you go in a deeper cities and outside of the coasts, you're going to see 20%, 30%, sometimes 40%. There was a small protest a few months ago in the border town of Dahbiya, where you have over 50% unemployment. So these, when you have recruiters come in and these recruiters get the opportunity to come in a lax environment where they have access to mosques, and they're able to recruit, and they get money coming in, by all accounts, from the Gulf region, and then you have unemployment, and you have sort of a religious void after years of dictatorship where religious activities were suppressed. So you put that in perspective, and you have this identity crisis for some of these young, whether we like it or we don't, they're Tunisians as well. And not to explain these terrorist acts, but we have to understand them in order to to root the cause of these.
Now, the tourist industry of Tunisia was attempting to revive itself.
Indeed.
And as you were mentioning, the situation of the dire economics, how badly is the tourist industry in Tunisia going to be hit by this incident?
The tourist industry is 7% of GDP in Tunisia. It employs over 400,000 people and add their families to that. So it is a major engine of the economy in Tunisia. And like we say, if the tourism industry sneezes, all of Tunisia gets a cold. So right now, since 2002, the last terrorist attack on the synagogue of Griba, there has never been this much of a hard hit to the tourism economy. All remains to be seen. We have seen a tremendous support from on social media, and every country that has already expressed support. Would that translate into maintaining at least the occupancy rates that we're expecting for this season? We don't know yet. Hard to tell. But the next few days, if not few weeks, will be revealing of that. We could lose, by all standards, 10, 15%. But so far, the reaction has been outstanding.
Right. 18 of the 23 killed were foreign tourists. Some heartbreaking stories.
20, yeah.
20 of the 23?
So 23 is the total of killed, 3 Tunisians, including the 2 terrorists, and 20 foreigners, if you don't mind. It's a United Nations of nationalities. We have Polish, we have Japanese, we have French, we have South African, we have Italian, we have Russian. I mean, this is what Tunisia is. I mean, it's basically a place for everybody to come. These are guests of Tunisia, of all Tunisians, and it's really heartwarming to see this. I come to you with a heavy heart. We have 47 wounded, 7 of whom have left the hospitals safe and sound. 6 of the 47 are Tunisian. Today was laid to rest a national hero, Mr. Ayman Morjan, who was part of the SWAT team that launched the assault and was able to eliminate these 2 things. And and
he was one of the security guards or officers.
No, he's part of the brigade, the SWAT team that came in against the hostage situation that was taking place after the
And they think that there might still be 2 or 3 more people involved who are on the loose, but 9 people have been arrested.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you think that this incident could have the effect that we've seen happening in so many countries, that when you have such an incident, that security measures become stronger and the government tends to crack down on the freedoms of all people.
Sonali, this is my #1 concern, to be honest with you. I mean, of course, the welfare, and our sincere condolences to lost lives, but it is a threat to our safety and freedom of speech and freedom of being a citizen.
Which people fought really hard for and lost their lives for just 4 years ago. And
with a security apparatus that is still recovering from a position of non-existing citizenship. That everybody is just basically a servant to the upper political class. Now we're recovering the citizen right, and we are every organization, non-profit organization that is defending freedom of speech and citizenship, have expressed their concern as to the retaliation, the way the government and the security forces will be reacting should prevent any human rights abuses.
Yeah.
That is our #1 concern.
Yeah.
So we hope and we call that the law on the books should be honored, and everybody needs to. We will not create more terrorists by trying to resolve this terrorist issue. So really,
And so
yeah.
finally, on the issue of how to resolve this, is this a regional problem, not just a Tunisian problem? Is this something that countries have to come together? You mentioned earlier financial support from the Gulf region that's sort of feeding some of these movements that are discontented. Is this a regional problem that Tunisia needs to have better relations with other nations fighting similar problems, but do it in a way that actually can solve a problem rather than fueling it, which is what the U.S. tends to do?
Indeed. This is not just a regional problem, this is a world problem. It's officially a world problem, from the attacks in Paris to the attacks to, in Sweden. Everywhere it's the same problem. And in fact, some of these tourists said it happened in our country too, and we're going to have to deal with it. Now, the real concern right now is the Libyan border. Initially, the Algerian border was a problem, and it still remains a problem. But as more and more of Tunisian army has more success in the Algerian border, now we have the Libyan border that needs to be.
And Libya has, of course, devolved into chaos, not the least reasons of which being the U.S. NATO intervention.
And all the weapons are coming from Libya. There's no question about that. It's and then we're calling on the President Obama to use the stroke of his pen to really speed up the procurement process for the Tunisian army, an army that has proved itself time and time again a professional army that is there to protect the Tunisian people, is not involved in politics, and it's an army by all standards deserves the the support from the United States government. We don't need equipment in 2 years. We don't need equipment in 4 months. We need equipment now. And, night vision goggles are great, but we need equipment to protect our borders. And I think the president has the power to do this now. He did it with Iraq. He does it with Afghanistan. Tunisia needs the equipment and needs it now. And
just to cut off weapons flows from Libya.
Absolutely, and then the army needs the certain equipment to protect those borders, and the procurement process takes a long time, and we need it now.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Bechir, for giving us your perspective on this unfolding situation in Tunisia, and we'll certainly post your website to our site later.
Thank you, Sonali. It was a pleasure being here. Again, my condolences to all the families, and hopefully better things will come.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Sonali.
My guest, Bechir Blagui, is the founder of the website freetunisia.org, where you can read more of his work. This is Uprising. We'll be right back.
Goodness.
This is Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. Did you know that Uprising is now a TV show as well as a radio show? We rely on subscribers to our YouTube channel to fund the TV production of Uprising, and you can sign up to be a subscriber at youtube.com/uprising with Sonali. It's a familiar story. A corrupt corporation spews toxic waste into the environment for years, counting on poor residents not having the political clout to hold them accountable soon enough. Negligent government oversight agencies enable the pollution until it's too late and people begin falling sick. Those are the broad outlines of what has happened in Vernon, California, where Exide Corporation for years allowed deficiencies in its battery recycling plant to result in hazardous waste pollution. The California Department of Toxic Substances Control documented the violations for 2 decades, but did nothing more than fine the company. Now, about a week ago, Exide finally admitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office that it is engaged in criminal activity. After years of local activism and lawsuits, the battery recycling facility will be closed and a cleanup process will begin. But as usual, no one is expected to face prison time. My guest is Gladys Limon. She is an attorney at the Communities for a Better Environment, a statewide environmental justice organization that carries out its work through community organizing, policy work, and litigation. She now joins me in studio. Welcome to Uprising, Gladys.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. Well, can you first tell us how serious the extent of the toxic pollution has been from the plant? Are there documented illnesses as a result?
Well, the contamination from this facility is egregious. It has, as you said, spewed toxics over the heads of communities for decades, including lead and arsenic, which are both carcinogens. And we have, for example, the AQMD, the Air Quality Management District, stated that out of 450 facilities that it regulates, Exide's facility has created the largest cancer risk. We also know that of the initial remediation area of homes, of the homes that have been tested, at least 60% have resulted in very high levels, dangerous levels of lead. Over 20% have tested at over 1,000 parts per million, which essentially converts them into hazardous waste sites.
Wow. Why is it that nothing was done? How is it that a state government agency knew what was happening for so long and did nothing? They, I understand, fined the company 7 times over 20 years, but that's it.
Well, Communities for a Better Environment, as well as others, have called for an investigation in which these types of questions must be answered under oath in order to determine how this happened, what exactly happened, and who made these decisions for what reasons. This is an endangerment of the public caused not only by Exide, but also by the department that is charged with enforcing our health and safety laws.
So I understand that the original company that Exide bought the plant from in 2000 was issued a temporary permit to operate on. That was in 1981. Then Exide bought it in 2000. It continued operating under this temporary permit. How is that even possible? What does a permit mean if it can operate on a temporary one for 33 years?
Right. So just to provide some context, the federal law here is RCRA, the Resources Conservation and Recovery Act, 1976, and the state here has its delegated authority to enforce the federal law in our state analog. And the interim status authorization is not actually a permit. It's an interim authorization to operate while the state does a full and complete determination of the application to obtain the hazardous waste facility permit. So
they never actually got a real permit?
They never had a permit. They had interim status, and of course the state here completely fell asleep. It acted recklessly in essentially allowing this interim status authorization to convert into a permanent type of permit.
And this company, I mean, it just sounds so bizarre. Exide has filed for bankruptcy twice. Once in 2002, just 2 years after it bought the plant, and then exactly 10 years, or almost exactly 10 years again. Clearly, this company is irresponsible. What is its fate now?
Well, we're talking about a criminal corporate actor, even based on its own admission, right? This is a company that has acted in a very rogue way, has never shown good faith. Instead of complying with enforcement actions and efforts, it has continued to resist any enforcement efforts. It has decided to spend millions in resisting compliance with the law instead of doing right by its neighbors and by our laws.
It could have spent that money in actually cleaning up its act.
Exactly, yeah, and has taken advantage of bankruptcy laws every time that there has been a meaningful enforcement effort.
Right. I mean, that's a familiar script. We hear this over and over again. So many corporations who, instead of actually doing what they should be doing to protect the public, following regulations, hire PR firms or, find ways to fight the public, and then government agencies looking the other way. Let's talk a little bit about how people have been politically organizing around this issue and the sorts of lessons that can be learned from this. This is a familiar story. How did people in the surrounding neighborhoods organize? Because I can imagine that they might have felt they were abandoned.
Well, this is a resilient community, and unfortunately there are many communities that have been affected by Exide's contamination, but people have been, this is really their victory. The community residents are the heroes. They're the ones who created this result. Youth, adult members, activists, community advocates have this has been their struggle. They've carried it for decades. It's unfortunate they've had to spend so much time and effort to obtain this result. But, they have just been amazing. They are a source of inspiration. And, one of the lessons learned is to never give up. The community is empowered. We have youth activists such as Adi Vasquez, we have Mauro Barrera, we have a number of different community leaders who have carried this fight. And there's also a larger lesson to be learned. It's not just the local environmental justice communities that are impacted. Of course, one of the tenets of an environmental justice is that no community should be disproportionately impacted by these sorts of environmental harms, but nobody should be subjected to these sorts of environmental harms, right? So when we have these sorts of environmental harms that affect your very ability to actualize yourself, that affect your health, these sorts of toxics like arsenic and lead, they affect your neurological, respiratory systems. And so an infringement of these sorts of human rights infringe every other civil and human right that we law, right? Everything from our right to an education, to labor, for example. So this is something that affects everyone. And of course, contamination knows no border. So even though these communities are the ones that are being impacted most directly and immediately, of course, the water that's been contaminated moves into our entire watershed, the air moves, obviously. And as long as these corporations continue to be given shelter in environmental justice communities where they feel like they can hide from representatives and from other probably more affluent communities, they're going to continue to be an obstacle to obtain sustainable practices to ensure that none of these businesses have these dirty practices.
Right. Vernon is not Beverly Hills, and corporations like this would never operate in wealthy neighborhoods.
Absolutely
and if they'd
not.
even tried, there would be such an outcry. So as you implied, they rely on communities not necessarily having the same kind of political clout everywhere. So let's talk about the cleanup. What sort of cleanup process will take place? Who's going to hold Exide responsible for cleanup? Because even if the plant has been closed now, once toxic chemicals leach into the air, water, and soil, putting the genie back in the bottle is really hard. I mean, how do you clean sand and soil,
Absolutely. Well, there are two primary responsible actors here, Exide and the state, right? The state is responsible, again, for enforcing our hazardous waste laws, for protecting people, and here it failed to fulfill its legal mandate and its duties to shut down this corporation. It should have closed it long ago. And the contamination, unfortunately, is still undetermined. We still don't know the scope and extent of it. There's been an initial residential area that's been identified, and there are about 450 homes that we know of in that particular area. Again, it's extensive. It's people have been subjected to these unconscionable burdens for too long, and we're hoping that the department will continue to aggressively enforce the agreements that it's entered into with Exide to ensure that there's not only the money, but that there's a meaningful remediation.
Right. So that the fight is still not over.
Absolutely not.
Cleanup is a second phase.
This is just the beginning.
Now, Exide admitted criminal wrongdoing. Why is no one going to prison for this? What sort of deal did they cut with the U.S. Attorney's Office?
Again, this is a rogue actor, and we know that any individual, if you and I would have committed these sorts of acts, we would be in prison right now. Unfortunately, this is the system that we have.
Corporations get to absolve themselves of crimes. I mean, it's just...
Yes, and the bankruptcy court provides those sorts of tools, right, to protect the viability of corporations. I think that the U.S. Attorney's Office, they entered into this agreement in order to close a facility and also to ensure that through the bankruptcy proceeding that it doesn't liquidate, and so that it's still viable and operating in order to continue to hold it financially responsible.
Just for the cleanup process, but not to actually continue doing business.
Well, I believe that that was the objective.
They're not going to continue doing business, we hope, right?
Well, they operate in over 80 countries. They have other facilities in the U.S., right? Okay. Unfortunately, what we're going to depend on is the Department of Toxic Substances Control to enforce and aggressively enforce the agreements for remediation.
So California State Senator Kevin DeLeon has been active in the story. He said that the Department of Toxic Substances Control must be held accountable. What will happen to the state regulatory agency? Now, they have said it's a matter of understaffing. Is that true?
Well, Senator DeLeon definitely has been a leader of our representatives in this fight. We need this department to be completely reformed. There was a bill that he successfully carried last year, SB 812. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed that bill. We, again, need this reform. We're hoping that it will go forward again this year, and this time he will sign that bill. But yes, sir, it's not just about resources. Of course, they have a very, very large responsibility in enforcing our laws.
And not enough staff to do it.
It's also about the leadership, and it's about their ability ability to understand who they are. They are there to enforce the laws and to serve and protect the people, not to serve corporate interests.
And you think that that's what they've been doing these years?
The DTSC has, instead of enforcing the law and acting pursuant to the overwhelming evidence of showing that this corporation is unable to comply with our laws and unable to respect residents' health and safety, the DTSC instead created this sort of chaotic patchwork of settlement agreements, corrective actions, light fines, rather than fulfilling its mandate and its duty.
Can you imagine if people were treated the same as corporations were when we committed crimes? I mean,
yeah, we can act with complete impunity.
Yeah. I want to thank you so much, Gladys Limon, for joining us today, and best of luck in the next phase of this fight against Exide Corporation. My guest, Gladys Limon, is an attorney at Communities for a Better Environment, which is a statewide environmental justice organization that carries out its work through community organizing, policy work, and litigation. It's based, of course, in California, where this program is produced. This is Uprising. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali. Every morning I get into work and I scour the news of the day. Some days that feels like self-mutilation. To face the horrors of California's dwindling water, Antarctica's melting glaciers, Syria's massacred children, alongside the Republican Party's increase in military expenditures, the European Central Bank's $1.4 billion building, and the obscene amounts of Wall Street CEOs' bonus checks. Why is our world so upside down? Why, if we are the brainiest of living creatures, are we on a speeding train heading towards our collective doom with no noticeable prospects of slowing down and possibly surviving? We have relied on technology to save us, but in fact technology has failed us. We have relied on religion to assuage us, but God has overseen his injustice. We vacillate between denial and despair, but maybe we need to rethink our place in the world. My guest, Charles Eisenstein, has explored the pitfalls of what he calls the old story of control or separation and embarked on a quest to create a new story. Charles Eisenstein graduated from Yale in mathematics and philosophy. He's written several books, including Sacred Economics, Money, Gift, and Society in the Age of Transition. And his latest book is The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And he now joins me in studio. Welcome to Uprising.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. Well, we seem to be in a period of transition worldwide, one that climate change has forced us to face, and our systems are unsustainable. We sort of know this in our gut. We sense this. We communicate today like never before. We're able to because of technology, but we're still isolated. Do you think this is a unique time in history, or can you sort of compare it to the other time we faced collective annihilation, like during, the Cold War when nuclear weapons hung over our head?
Yeah, I think that we're kind of in a time that began then in the sense, like nuclear weapons and climate change are similar because they're showing us that the solution isn't going to be to conquer the other. Nuclear weapons made it impossible ever to have final victory over our enemy, because what we did to them, we would be doing to ourselves, mutually assured destruction. Yeah. And the same thing is true now with climate change. Like we're discovering what we do to nature we can't escape it. We can't engineer our way out of it. We can't insulate ourselves from it. What we do to nature, we're doing to ourselves.
Do you find that people get overwhelmed by the world? Is there the sense of despair that paralyzes us from taking sometimes even the smallest action?
Yes. Next question. Yeah, and I think partly despair is built into our basic worldview, you know, that fundamentally says that we are separate beings in a world of other, and therefore not much you can do is going to make a difference. Plus, we have a worldview that says change happens by exerting a force, by exerting your power. And in the story that we live in, the power is in the hands of the people who are doing all the things you listed at the beginning. They have the guns, they have the money, they have the surveillance state, they have all of these things. So what hope is there if we accept that change happens in the way we've been taught?
Right.
Yeah.
Earlier in the month, we did a story on antibiotics and how when they were first invented, antibiotics were seen as this miracle cure that helped, save people from horrible bacterial infections. Millions of lives were saved, and it was seen as this technological wonder of our age. Now we're realizing there was a price to pay for the use and the overuse of antibiotics, and we're losing our microbiomes. It may be what's behind so many of our modern illnesses. And is that an example of how we as humans just aren't equipped, it seems, to foresee the consequences of our actions? And do we need to change our mindset to understand that every action we take, even if it seems positive right now, will have a reaction that we just need to be prepared for somehow?
I think part of the problem, with antibiotics, that approach to solving a problem, disease, for example, is based on linear thinking. Here's the proximate cause. It's a bacteria. Why are you sick? It's a bacteria. So kill the bacteria, you've solved the problem. And that works sometimes. But when the bacteria isn't actually the problem, but maybe a symptom of a deeper problem, then that approach doesn't work. Same with agriculture. When you see the weeds or the insects as the problem, the solution is obvious.
Right.
Kill the weeds, kill the insects. But what if weeds and insects are a symptom of something deeper, like monocrop agriculture? Or what if you think that the terrorists are the problem, so the solution is to kill the terrorists? The enemy is a problem, so the solution is to kill the enemy. So this is all part of the...
Crime is a problem, let's lock people up.
Right.
We could have example after example.
Right, and so really the transition is into systems change, where we realize that any one thing mirrors everything else. And that anything we do is going to have effects everywhere. And as long as we understand that, I'm not saying, well, therefore we shouldn't do anything because we can't predict it. But we have to understand that the world is not linear and therefore not controllable in the way that we thought it was.
For our Southern California audience, I want to mention that Charles Eisenstein is going to be speaking tonight at the Armory Center for the Arts in Pasadena at 7 p.m. So I'm sure some in our audience are thinking, well, isn't activism the answer to fixing the world? Don't we have to organize from the bottom to hold powerful elites accountable? Isn't that what can give us meaning, what can help guide our narrative of the world?
Well, obviously nothing's going to change if we don't take some action.
Right.
I think, though, a lot of activists are realizing that the kinds of actions they've been taking habitually and are kind of habitual responses to problems are themselves part of the problem. So, for example, the mindset of conquest. Well, how are you going to change society? Well, you got to conquer the bad guys. That doesn't work if you don't have enough force to conquer the bad guys. And then what happens when you realize that the so-called bad guys are, like, you have to include yourself in that category because we're all complicit. And then you look at revolutions, that those rare ones that succeeded in overcoming the perpetrators. But then the revolutionaries became themselves the new perpetrators. So I think a deeper revolution is necessary, not just in our ends, but also in our means.
So you write in your book about finding a story, rejecting the old story because it just isn't the right one for us. Why is it important for us to find a narrative to fit ourselves in this world? Why do we, is it something that makes humans feel unmoored if we don't have a story to define our existence?
You could even say that human beings are the meaning-making animal. Not to say that there's maybe not a time to come into immediate experience, embodied experience outside of story, but if you want to create anything in the world beyond the power of your two hands to create it, you have to enroll other people in a story that organizes human activity and creativity. The right is very good at this, at telling a story. When you tell the right story, then people's actions naturally come from that story. The crisis of our time is in part a crisis of our stories or our myths. When I was growing up, the old story in its political expression was still really strong. America, land of the free, home of the brave, and bringing freedom and democracy to the world, or science creating a better and better world.
And that, of course, might have been unique to the community that you came from. For example, people in other communities might have had a different story and a different vision of what America was.
But now, even among the privileged classes, that story is wearing thin. Yeah.
Your book subtitle is The Vision and Practice of Interbeing. And I want to quote from your chapter called Cynicism, where you open saying, I would like to speak to those of you who feel triggered by the principles of interbeing I laid out earlier, which I admit smack of New Age puffery. Actually, let me be brutally honest here. I only use the phrase New Age puffery as a way to implicitly assure you that I'm no dupe of such a thing, that I'm on the side of the hard-headed realists. See, here I am joining you in derision. Charles, I admit that I did feel the same derision. You then go on to say, the derision of the cynic comes from a wound of crushed idealism and betrayed hopes. So I'm a cynic with betrayed hopes.
Yeah, and so am I. So yeah, the principles of interbeing, there's a whole list of them, including things like the world outside of ourselves has the qualities, the properties of a self. That we're not just the only sentient beings in a world of other, that we're all interconnected, that what we do to the world, we do to ourselves, that anything that happens in the world is happening to us.
Every action has a reaction.
That every action has cosmic significance. And this is something that we can feel. When a species goes extinct, when you read of these terrible things happening, why does that hurt? Yeah. Is it because you're making some implicit rational calculation that says that that's going to harm your rational self-interest?
Of course I do. When the wolves go extinct,
right.
I know that.
And
right. No, you're right.
Right. So it hurts because it's happening to us because we're not separate, and that's something that every child knows. Every child knows that he or she lives in a world that's alive, and every child knows that their gifts are important and that the things that they do matter. But we've been brought up inside a narrative or even a mythology and a system, an educational system, a money system that denies the sacredness of the world, that denies the significance of our actions, and that hurts.
Well, what you seem to be describing is religion, isn't it? I mean, we have, for as long as humans have had, the ability to have recorded language, we've developed religions, we've developed stories to find a place for ourselves. There are more atheists than ever before. I count myself among them. Religion seems to have little meaning. We tend to trust not necessarily science, but at least a scientific method of questioning. I certainly do that. As the people pass judgment on science, saying it's brought us nothing but trouble because science helped us create the bomb. But it's simply a mode of inquiry.
Okay. Yeah. So what I'm saying does sound like religion or spirituality, but see, what happened was when our deep narratives took sacredness and meaning away from matter, then religion responded by saying, okay, yeah, science, you're right, but there's this other thing called spirit that brings the property of sacredness back into matter. But that's actually part of the same ideology, and it's not the beliefs that indigenous people had. They didn't believe that there was a separate thing that brought sacredness to the world. They believed that the world was sacred through and through. Science
So the idea of a God looking up,
Right.
looking down on us from up high,
Yeah.
different from seeing trees and nature being infused with some level of importance, at least the same level that we might put humanity on.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask a child, what's it like to be that tree? That's not a ridiculous question for the child.
Yeah.
The child and the indigenous person live in a world where trees have an experience of being. Science is not only a method of inquiry, it's also a set of ideologies, it's also an institution. And it has metaphysical assumptions that are very much like a religion, and it has a priesthood too, very much like a religion. For example, the assumption of objectivity, that there's an objective world outside of ourselves that can therefore respond to our inquiries in a stable way over time.
Absolutely. Scientists get moved by their own biases constantly, which leads to years of bad science, and we see that over and over again.
Right.
But there is the ability to correct it. There is a correcting influence, peer reviewing, and eventually old paradigms get shifted. But at the same time, I mean, as somebody, I have a background in science, I actually met several fellow scientists who were deeply religious too, which is also really interesting when people can hold those things in their heads together, and there's nothing wrong with that. I wanted to come back to what you were saying about seeing the world and other sort of living parts of the world as part of our, as having greater importance. I mean, you're not just talking, I'm assuming, about sentient beings, right? I mean, the grass and the mountains and the rocks. Some people see that and they feel that if they would just stop eating animals, stop wearing leather, that they're respecting the world. But are we? I mean, we rely on one another. We feed off of each other.
Yeah. So when we begin to invest beingness in beings beside ourselves, the first step is to say, the people that we've dehumanized, the other races, the other cultures, they are equally human. They are.
Right. We haven't even done that as a
Right.
as
We're
a
still working on that one.
species.
Right. But then the next step might be for the animals, because they're less like us than other people. But it's not too big a stretch to invest them with beingness and sacredness too. And then maybe the next step is to do that for plants. Even though they don't have a central nervous system. If you ask indigenous herbalists, how did you guys gain your herbal knowledge? They all say the same thing. The plants told us. And then you could go beyond that to rocks, to water, to mountains, to the planet itself.
Okay, so now we're coming back to what, to me, I mean, I don't mean to insult you, but sounds like New Age puffery.
Right, right. And that kind of, but see, that that's a kind of epistemological imperialism that says that, we've risen above those primitive beliefs, just as we've economically risen above them. And so we go around the world in the mindset of development and say, we're going to teach you how to live. We're going to bring our ways to you. You're going to, have work for wages. You're going to have a centralized infrastructure. And this is what the World Bank and the IMF have been doing for decades. Well, the same pattern says not only do we know better how to live than you, but we also know better how to know than you. Our bodies of knowledge and our ways of knowing are superior to yours, and your course of development is going to be to adopt our ways of thinking. And I think that whole approach, all of these facets of development are in crisis because we look around us. 50 years ago, you could kind of persuade yourself that we were on the right course. But now it's impossible to believe that. And so our culture is reaching this failure of our mythology, of our stories, that goes beyond just our technology and economics, but it goes to our whole worldview. And we're coming to this moment of doubt and therefore of humility, where we're going we're investigating other belief systems, not as these cultural curiosity objects, but from the place of, wow, maybe we don't know. So I think.
But when you say other belief systems, I mean, certainly there have been Americans and people in the West for years that have gone to find themselves in the East, the eat, pray lovers among us.
Right.
And honestly, someone who comes from the East, I just find that kind of sad.
Right, because there's also a lot of cultural appropriation going on and a lot of reaching for identity. Our identities are falling apart. So, maybe I'll, adopt a Sanskrit name. Maybe I'll get my, this lost sense of identity that comes from our stories from somewhere else. So I think this is part of.
It's a search. It's a sense of people searching. You write in your book how many of us are in pain. We know the world is a painful place, and dealing with the pain of knowing the world is deeply wrong and not having a solution. Is that the reason for trying to develop a story? And also, I think you're clear in your book that you don't have that new story, that we're sort of in between stories.
Yeah. Like the part of the old story would be the expert coming and telling everybody how to do things and saying, here's the solutions. I don't think we're in
You're
a
not
place.
the expert.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think anybody knows what the solutions are. I mean, I wrote a whole book on economics, a lot of nuts and bolts stuff. It's
You went to Yale. You must be an expert.
right, but none of those.
Thanks,
Like I think that the systems that are going to emerge in the future are things that no one knows today. We get little glimpses here and there, but no one's going to. The way that our transition is going to happen isn't that somebody's going to have the master plan and convince everybody else, yeah, this is the most brilliant way to do it. I've mathematically worked it out. We're going to go through a period of chaos and emergence, the breakdown of the old, the space between stories, and the emergence of something new.
Do you get asked often, what is the solution to world problems? And then is that question itself part of the problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's just what I was just saying, But I think that part of this emergence comes, you were mentioning pain, we have all this unprocessed pain from what we, the dominant culture at least, but through our own complicity, have done to the world. Like, there's a lot of horrible things happening out there. And when we are shielded from that, behind whatever systems of rationalization and obliviousness that we have, when we're shielded from that, that doesn't actually keep the pain out.
Yeah.
It still hurts, but it's diffuse. We don't know why it hurts.
Yeah, a lot of people just say, I'm just going to turn off the news. I can't hear it. It's too depressing.
Right. Or you'll engage in some addiction or anything.
Self-medication.
Yeah. Anything, or entertainment. Anything to keep
or
the pain.
organized religion or whatever.
Yeah. But I think it's when we actually feel that pain, feel the grief, then we know why it hurts, and then we can act more with greater clarity and less inner conflict.
What you just described sounds like less clarity to me. I mean, as I mentioned when we started this show, reading the news and having to read the news as part of my job every day feels like self-mutilation.
Yeah.
And, so far I haven't engaged in addictive behavior, but, I do art or whatever. I cook. I try to find forms of therapy, but it's still not a solution to fixing the world. But I understand that even that idea of a solution to fixing the world is the wrong approach. And so we feel unmoored.
Yeah, and sometimes one of the escapes is to engage in habitual actions that aren't actually doing any good, but at least you get to tell yourself that I'm part of the solution.
Gardening, habitual actions.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think that gardening isn't coming from, like, there's no rational way that you can say that gardening is actually going to, help all these problems in the world. I mean, you could make some kind of contorted case, that you're doing some incremental amount of reduction of CO2 or something like that. But really, that's not why you're gardening. You're gardening because you love it, because it nourishes you. That's a deeper kind of revolution.
Well, let's end on the idea of love. Thank you very much, Charles, for joining us today. And best of luck.
Thank you.
My guest, Charles Eisenstein, is going to be speaking tonight at the Armory Center for the Arts, and he is the author of The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. His event is at 7 p.m. This is Uprising. Bipasha Shom is our senior producer. Anna Buss is our assistant producer. Christian Beck is our production coordinator. Darren White is our research intern. And Alexander Hobbs is our technical director. Teddy Robinson and Kiana Turner are our audio engineers. Annie Mendoza is our social media coordinator. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Uprising with Sonali. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. Our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. I'll see you tomorrow.